His fingers tightened around my wrist hard enough to leave marks, but it wasn't the pain that startled me. It was the silence that followed. In the room filled with nobles with their silk gowns and treacherous smiles, he pulled me close and whispered words no one else could hear. "I know who you really are." The world stopped. The air between us grew thick like fog. In that instant, I understood there was no longer any escape. Not from him, nor from the secret that had haunted me since the day I was born. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The sound of rain against the roof tiles had calmed me since childhood. It was a constant reminder that no matter how bad the storm outside, I was sheltered. That night, however, not even that familiar sound could silence the thoughts pounding in my head. I clutched the worn shawl around my shoulders and watched the drops trickle down the wooden window, forming small rivers that joined and separated, like lives crossing by chance. My name is Helen, but for years I answered to girl or simply you there. I was born in circumstances no one was proud to mention. My mother was one of the servants at the manor, and her belly grew during the harshest winter our small village had ever seen. I never knew who my father was, but the glances and whispers always gave me enough clues. When I turned 7, I understood why the other servants treated me with a mixture of pity and distance. I carried on my face the mixed features of servant and master. Old Mrs. Matilda, the head housekeeper of the manor, was the one who raised me after my mother left this world, taken by childbed fever. "You're like oil and water in the same glass," she'd sometimes tell me, with those tired eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. "You belong nowhere, but you can adapt to anywhere." And so I lived, learning to become invisible when necessary, to serve without being noticed, to observe without being seen. I grew up among the dark corridors of the manor house, amidst whispers and secrets, learning to read not only the letters of the few books I managed to hide under my straw mattress, but also the glances, the intentions, the silences laden with unspoken meanings. There was a sad beauty in that stone mansion. The spacious halls with tapestries from distant lands, the silver chandeliers that gleamed like suspended constellations, the portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to follow me through the house. I knew every corner, every crack in the walls, every floorboard that creaked underfoot. I knew the secrets the walls kept, the stories the older servants told in hushed tones on winter nights, when the wind howled like a restless spirit through the corridors. Mrs. Clara, the lady of the house, treated me with distant coldness, never cruel but never affectionate. Her green eyes, so much like my own, always averted when we met. Perhaps that was why I had been assigned to work in the kitchen and the orchard, far from the main halls where she spent her days. It was precisely in the orchard, among the apple trees laden with red fruits gleaming like rubies, that my life began to change. I was 18 when the new lord of the neighbouring lands arrived in our village. The old baron had died without direct heirs, and his properties had been handed over to a distant relative no one knew. Rumours ran wild, as they always do, in places too small to keep secrets. They said the new lord was a sombre man who had fought in distant wars and returned with scars on both his skin and his soul. Others swore he was versed in forbidden arts, and that the full moon transformed him into some creature of the night. I smiled at these stories as I picked apples, balancing on the old wooden ladder. People always needed to create monsters to explain what they didn't understand. The sky that afternoon was an almost painful blue, without a cloud in sight. The heat made small drops of sweat run down my back under my simple cotton dress. I hummed a low, ancient tune Mrs. Matilda had taught me, something about a maiden and a knight who never returned from war. I was so focused on the melody and the fruit that I almost fell off the ladder when a deep voice cut through the silence of the orchard. It seems the legends about the apples on this property were not exaggerated. I turned so abruptly that the basket on my arm swayed, and 2 or 3 apples rolled to the ground. A man stood a few feet away, observing me with contained curiosity. Tall, broad-shouldered, he wore dark, simple clothes, but of a fine fabric that betrayed his position. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face with striking features. It wasn't a face one would call conventionally handsome. There was something almost wild in his appearance, as if civilization was just a thin mask over a more primitive nature. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. Grey as a storm sky, they seemed to pierce through skin and see what lay beneath, and now those eyes examined me with disconcerting intensity. "Pardon me, sir," I managed to say, quickly descending the ladder and making an awkward curtsy. "I didn't hear you approach." There was no reason to hear. "I didn't want to be heard," he replied, stepping closer to pick up one of the fallen apples. His fingers were long, with small white scars on the knuckles, hands that had known work and struggle, not just comfort. "Have you worked here long?" The question caught me by surprise. "All my life, sir." He spun the fruit between his fingers, examining it carefully before bringing it to his lips. He bit slowly, savouring each piece without taking his eyes off me. There was something hypnotic in that simple gesture. "What is your name?" he asked, after swallowing. "Helen, sir?" An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Helen," he repeated, as if testing the sound on his tongue. "It has a Greek feel. Do you know the story of Helen of Troy, the woman for whom a war was fought?" I felt my face burn. Few knew I could read, that in the hidden hours of the night, I devoured the books from the library that I managed to borrow without permission. Stories of distant lands, of heroes and monsters, of impossible loves and epic battles. "I know some stories, sir," I replied cautiously. He took another bite of the apple, juice trickling slightly from the corner of his mouth. He wiped it with the back of his hand, a casual gesture that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "Stories are dangerous, Helen. They make us believe we can be more than we are." He tossed the rest of the fruit aside, where it fell with a dull thud on the grass. "I am Alexander Daniels, the new lord of Blackwood Estate. And you have interesting eyes, green as emeralds but with a golden ring around the iris. Unusual." I lowered my gaze, suddenly self-conscious of the sweat on my skin, the stains on my simple dress, my rough, calloused hands. "Mr. Daniels," a female voice interrupted the moment, and I saw Mrs. Clara approaching along the stone path of the garden, accompanied by her only son, Theodore. "I see you're already getting to know our property." She wore a dark blue dress that enhanced her still slender figure despite her age. Her brown hair, now streaked with silver, was impeccably pinned in an elaborate bun. She approached with the elegance of someone raised to grace drawing rooms and receive important visitors. But her eyes, upon noticing me, acquired that familiar coldness. "Helen, finish picking the apples and take them to Mrs. Matilda. She needs them for tonight's pies," she ordered, without really looking at me. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, curtsying quickly. But before I could move away, I felt firm fingers touch my wrist. Alexander Daniels had moved with a silent swiftness that startled me. "Don't send her away on my account. Mrs. Clara, we were having an interesting conversation about apples and Greek stories," he said, without releasing my arm. His fingers were warm against my skin, causing a strange sensation that climbed my arm and spread through my chest. I saw Mrs. Clara's face pale slightly, and her eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. "Helen has many chores, Mr. Daniels, and I'm sure you didn't come all this way to discuss mythology with a servant." Her tone was polite, but with a firmness that allowed no argument. For a tense moment, I thought he wouldn't let me go. There was something defiant in his posture, as if he were testing the limits. Finally, his fingers loosened, and he stepped away with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Certainly, Mrs. Clara. It would be impolite of me to delay your preparations for dinner." He turned to me and made a slight, almost mocking bow. "It was a pleasure, Helen of the green eyes with golden rings." I felt the heat rise from my neck to my cheeks, and I knew I was blushing like the apples in my basket. With a quick curtsy, I moved away along the path leading to the kitchen, feeling 3 pairs of eyes follow me. Mrs. Clara's, cold and calculating. Theodore's, her son's, curious and slightly disdainful. And Alexander Daniels, grey and penetrating. As if they could see through my clothes, my skin, to the heart beating fast in my chest. It was only later, in the safety of the small alcove that served as my room, that I realised. He had called me Helen of the green eyes with golden rings, the same eyes as Mrs. Clara, The same eyes I avoided looking at in the cracked mirror I kept under my mattress, because they reminded me too much of what I was and what I could never be. That night, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rattled the house. But it wasn't just the storm that disturbed the sleep of the manor's residents. In the main hall, raised voices could be heard even through the thick oak doors. "He knows," Mrs. Clara was saying, her usually controlled voice now trembling with emotion. "I'm absolutely sure." The way he looked at her, the questions he asked. "It's no coincidence." "You're seeing ghosts where there are none, Clara," replied her older brother Augustus, who had arrived in haste from the city after receiving an urgent letter. "No one knows. No one would ever know if you didn't act so suspiciously every time the subject comes up." I shouldn't have been listening. I was just passing through the corridor, carrying tea for Mrs. Matilda, who suffered from joint pain on damp nights like that one. But something in the urgent tone of the voices made me stop. And when I heard my name pronounced, it was impossible to keep walking. "He specifically asked about Helen," Mrs. Clara insisted. "And you know what they say about him? That he investigates everything, that nothing escapes his knowledge, that he bought Blackwood Estate for a specific reason." And what reason would that be? Augustus's voice sounded tired, as if they had been through that conversation many times. "Revenge," she whispered, almost. "They say his father was ruined by my husband," Augustus finished when she hesitated. "By our brother." "Is that what you mean?" The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel its weight even through the door. My hand gripped the tray until my knuckles turned white. "If he knows about the girl," Mrs. Clara began. "He knows nothing," Augustus interrupted with a force that made me step back. And even if he suspected, what could he prove after so many years? Everyone believes the servant died of fever along with the child. We ourselves almost believe it from repeating the story so much. My heart pounded so hard I feared they could hear it from the other side of the door. The room seemed to spin around me, and the tea on the tray trembled along with my hands. "He'll use her against us," Mrs. Clara's voice was choked now, as if holding back tears. "Against Theodore. Against everything we've built. Then we get rid of her." The third voice that entered the conversation chilled me to the bone. It was Theodore, Mrs. Clara's only son, heir to everything the family possessed. My half-brother? The idea was so absurd I almost let out a hysterical laugh. "Theodore!" Mrs. Clara exclaimed, horrified. "What is it, Mother? It's not as if she means anything to any of us. She's a servant, nothing more. We can find some distant family who needs help, send some money along. In a week, no one will remember her." The casual tone with which he spoke of removing me from existence as one disposes of an unwanted piece of furniture sent a chill through my body. I took a step back, then another, wanting to get as far away as possible from that conversation, that revelation, that veiled threat. It was then that I bumped into something solid, or rather someone. Strong hands held my shoulders to prevent me from falling, and when I turned, I met the grey eyes of Alexander Daniels. There was no surprise in them, just a kind of contained satisfaction, as if he had found exactly what he was looking for. "Careful, Helen," he said in a low voice, taking the tray from my trembling hands. "We wouldn't want to spill Mrs. Matilda's tea, would we?" I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape that corridor, that house, that life that suddenly seemed a carefully constructed lie. But he simply handed the tray back to me, adjusting it in my hands with a disconcerting gentleness. "I don't think this conversation was meant for our ears," he murmured, leaning in so only I could hear. "But now that we've heard it, we have to decide what to do with this information, don't we?" And with those words, he moved away silently down the corridor, leaving me standing there, holding a tray with tea that was now almost cold, with the world crumbling around me. That night, I didn't sleep. How could I? The words I had heard echoed in my mind like a macabre refrain. If what they had said was true, and something in my heart knew it was, then my entire life had been built on a lie. I wasn't the daughter of some random servant. I was the daughter of the late master of the house, blood sister to Theodore, legitimate heir to part of the family fortune and lands, and apparently a secret someone considered dangerous enough to get rid of me. The rain continued to fall through the night, turning into a fine drizzle as the first rays of sun began to tint the horizon. I got out of my untouched bed and walked to the small window. The world outside seemed washed clean, renewed by the night's storm. Water droplets on the leaves of the trees caught the rising light and shone like jewels. What should I do? Where could I go? I had no money, no friends outside that property, no proof of what I had discovered. The word of a servant against that of one of the region's most powerful families would hold no weight. And there was Alexander Daniels with his mysterious eyes and his unsettling presence. What was his role in all this? What did he want from me? The questions swirled in my mind like dry leaves in the wind, finding no answer or resting place. "Helen!" Mrs. Matilda's voice startled me from my thoughts. "Are you awake already, girl? Come, we have a lot of work today. The mistress wants everything perfect for tonight's dinner." I dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, trying to keep my face neutral as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't been turned upside down in a single stormy night. The kitchen bustled with activity. Servants came and went, carrying firewood for the ovens, sacks of flour, baskets of fresh vegetables from the garden. Mrs. Matilda coordinated everything with the efficiency of a general on a battlefield, distributing orders and checking every detail with her experienced eyes. "Ah, there you are. I need you to go to the cellar and bring 3 bottles of the special wine. The one on the back shelf with the golden seal," she said, without stopping to stir the sauce she was preparing. "Yes, ma'am," I replied automatically, grateful for a task that would take me away from the commotion and the glances. The cellar was cool and dark, lit only by a few shafts of light entering through the small, high windows. The smell of damp earth mingled with aged wood and wine. I walked among the shelves to the back where the most expensive wines were stored. I was on my tiptoes trying to reach a bottle on the highest shelf when I heard the cellar door close with a soft click. I turned quickly, almost dropping the bottle I had just picked up. Alexander Daniels stood by the door, watching me with that same unsettling intensity from the day before. "Mr. Daniels," I managed to say, my voice firmer than I expected. "Are you lost? This is the wine cellar. Visitors are not allowed in." "Visitors?" he completed, taking a few steps towards me. "Or perhaps you meant people like me. People who don't belong in the house. People who ask inconvenient questions. People who listen to conversations behind doors." I felt my face burn, but I kept my chin up. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." He smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "Lying doesn't suit you. Helen of the green eyes." He moved closer until he was only an arm's length away. "I know you heard the conversation last night. I saw your face, and I know you understood what it meant." The air seemed too thick to breathe. He was close, too close, his scent of sandalwood and something wilder invading my senses. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked. "The truth," he replied simply. "The same thing you want." Something in his voice, a raw sincerity, made me hesitate. For a moment, I thought of telling him everything. The conversation I had heard, the suspicions growing in my mind, the fear I felt, but then I remembered Theodore's words. "Then we get rid of her." And also Mrs. Clara's insinuations about the true reason Alexander Daniels had bought the neighbouring property. Vengeance. The word echoed in my mind like a warning. "I don't know what you're talking about," I repeated, averting my gaze. He sighed, running his fingers through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. "Shall we stop this game? We both know what you heard behind the door last night. We both know what it means." He took a step back, returning some of the personal space his presence had invaded. "But know this, Helen. I am probably the only person who can help you now. And you are the only one who can help me get what I came for." Before I could answer, the cellar door opened again, and the sudden light made me blink. Mrs. Matilda stood in the doorway, her wrinkled hands on her hips, her brow furrowed in disapproval. "Helen! What's taking you so long? The mistress is asking for the—" She stopped herself upon noticing Alexander. "Mr. Daniels." "Pardon me, I didn't know you were here. Can I help you with something?" Alexander smiled, instantly transforming into the charming and polite visitor I had met in the orchard. "Just admiring the wine collection. Mrs. Matilda. My father always said you could judge a man's character by the wine cellar he keeps." He turned to me with a polite smile. "Helen was kindly showing me some of the rarities stored here." Mrs. Matilda seemed to relax a little. though her eyes still showed a slight suspicion. "Well, sir, if you'd like to see the complete collection, I can call the butler. He knows every bottle like the back of his hand." She turned to me with more firmness. "Helen, take these bottles upstairs and then help with the flowers for the table. The mistress wants fresh arrangements in all the main rooms." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, quickly picking up the 3 bottles I had selected. As I passed Alexander towards the door, he lightly held my arm, leaning in to whisper in my ear, "Tonight, in the conservatory, after dinner. Come alone." His fingers brushed mine as he took one of the bottles, as if to help me with the weight. The touch was brief, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I nodded almost imperceptibly and quickly left the cellar, feeling his gaze follow me until the door closed behind me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of frantic activity. The entire house was being prepared for that night's dinner, which would bring together not only Alexander Daniels, but also several other landowners of the region. An opportunity to introduce the new neighbour to local society, as Mrs. Clara had explained to the servants, although I suspected there were other reasons behind that elaborate reception. I placed fresh flowers in the crystal vases, helped polish the silverware, spread the finest linen tablecloths over the tables, and all the while my mind was elsewhere. On the words heard behind the door, on the mystery surrounding my birth, on Alexander Daniels' invitation, or was it an order? When the sun began to set, Mrs. Matilda called me to a corner of the kitchen, away from the ears of the other servants. "Helen, the mistress asked you to serve at the table tonight." I looked at her in surprise. I was never allowed to serve at formal dinners. That work was reserved for the most experienced and well-trained servants, not for someone who usually worked in the kitchen and garden. But why? Mrs. Matilda pressed her lips into a thin line as she always did when she was worried or displeased. "I don't know, girl. She just asked you to wear the new uniform and be present in the drawing room." Her eyes, framed by deep wrinkles, studied my face carefully. "Be careful tonight, Helen. There's tension in the air. Something I can't explain." She didn't need to explain. I felt it too. A heavy expectation, a premonition of change that hung over the manor like the storm clouds of the previous night. "I will be careful, Mrs. Matilda," I promised, squeezing her wrinkled hand affectionately. That woman had been the closest thing to a mother I had ever known. What would she think if she knew the truth about me? Would she be happy? Horrified? Or perhaps she already knew, as she seemed to know all the secrets of that house. The black dress with a starched white apron they gave me was new and custom-made. The fabric was finer than anything I had ever worn, and the cut accentuated the waist in a way my simple everyday dresses never would. I pinned my brown hair in a low bun, as I had seen the other servants do on formal occasions, and looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror. A stranger stared back at me, the green eyes with golden rings, the same eyes as Mrs. Clara, the same eyes as Theodore, seemed brighter against the black of the dress. My cheeks were flushed with excitement or fear, I couldn't tell. My lips, usually pale, had a natural pink colour. Is this what a lady looks like? I thought, turning my face to examine my profile. Is this what I would look like if I had been raised as a daughter, not as a servant? Guests began to arrive when the sky was already completely dark. From the kitchen window I could see carriages stopping in front of the house, bringing men in elegant suits and women in gleaming gowns that reflected the light of the lanterns like scales of exotic fish. Their laughter and conversations reached us in waves, a sound completely different from the tense silence that inhabited the house during the day. "Helen," called the head butler, a tall, thin man who rarely spoke to the lower servants. "It's time. Remember, serve from the left, clear from the right. Do not speak unless spoken to directly. And for heaven's sake, don't spill anything on the guests." I nodded, too nervous to speak. We followed in single file to the dining room, where the long oak table was set for 20 people. Crystals reflected the golden light of the chandeliers, the silverware gleamed like tiny mirrors, and the aroma of delicacies prepared throughout the day filled the air. Guests began to enter and take their places. I recognized some of them, neighbouring landowners who occasionally visited the manor for business meetings or celebrations. Others were strangers to me, probably from the city or more distant villages. Mrs. Clara, wearing a navy blue dress with silver details, sat at one end of the table with Theodore to her right. The other end was empty, the place of honor, reserved for the main guest. When everyone was almost seated, Alexander Daniels entered the drawing room. He had exchanged his simple daytime clothes for a formal black suit that accentuated the width of his shoulders and his imposing height. His hair was loose now, framing his strong-featured face like an ebony frame. He greeted some of the guests with brief nods, kissed Mrs. Clara's hand with studied elegance, and took his place at the opposite end of the table. It was then that his eyes met mine. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, something passed between us. A recognition, a silent promise. Then he averted his gaze, returning his attention to the hostess who was beginning to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we welcome Mr. Alexander Daniels today, the new owner of Blackwood Estate," Mrs. Clara said, her melodious voice filling the room. "We hope this will be the first of many occasions on which you will honor us with your presence." I began to serve the wine, moving silently around the table as I had been instructed. The ruby liquid flowed into the crystal glasses, and I took care not to spill a single drop. When I reached Alexander, he lightly raised his glass as if toasting me in private, before bringing it to his lips. "And how are you adapting to our sleepy region, Mr. Daniels?" asked one of the guests, a stout man with greying sideburns whom I knew to be the local judge. "It must be quite different from the city." "Different, yes, but in a refreshing way," Alexander replied, his deep voice easily audible even in the large room. "There's an authenticity here that the city lost long ago. And, of course, there's the history, a fascinating history." Something in the way he pronounced the word history made a momentary silence fall over the table. Mrs. Clara was the first to break it, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're interested in local history, Mr. Daniels?" "I'm interested in all stories, Mrs. Clara, especially the ones people prefer not to tell." He smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "For example, did you know that this estate and mine, Blackwood Estate, were once one in the past, divided after a family dispute 3 generations ago?" "Fascinating," another guest commented, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. "More than fascinating," Alexander continued, swirling the wine in his glass. "Tragic, I'd say. Brothers who became enemies, fortunes divided, lives ruined, and all because of a secret no one wanted to reveal." My hands trembled slightly as I served the soup to one of the guests. Across the table, I saw Mrs. Clara's face pale almost imperceptibly, while Theodore leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Alexander with ill-disguised hostility. "Old stories," said Augustus, who was seated near the middle of the table. "Hardly relevant to today, don't you think, Mr. Daniels?" Alexander inclined his head as if considering the question. "I disagree, Augustus. The past always shapes the present, especially when that past leaves unexpected heirs." A tense silence fell over the table. I saw Mrs. Clara bring her hand to her neck where a small vein pulsed visibly. Theodore seemed about to say something but was restrained by a stern look from his uncle. "Heirs?" asked one of the guests, a middle-aged woman with an elaborate feather arrangement in her hair. "What heirs?" Alexander smiled, but before he could answer, Mrs. Clara lightly tapped her glass with a silver spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I think we've had enough history for now," she said with a forced smile. "Let's enjoy this wonderful meal while it's hot. Helen, serve the next course, please." During the rest of the dinner, the conversation flowed more lightly, addressing topics such as the weather, recent harvests, the latest decrees from the state government. But there was an underlying tension that no one could completely ignore. From time to time, I caught Alexander observing me, his grey eyes following my movements around the room. And more than once, I caught Mrs. Clara and Augustus exchanging worried glances. When dessert was served, an elaborate construction of cream, fruit, and puff pastry that had taken hours to prepare, Alexander rose from his seat, holding his wine glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, and all eyes turned to him. "To Mrs. Clara, our generous hostess, to her family," he paused significantly on the word, "and to new beginnings. Because, as we all know, the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how long it stays buried." The guests raised their glasses, murmuring in agreement, completely oblivious to the true meaning behind those words. But I knew. And Mrs. Clara did too, judging by the stiffness of her smile and the slight tremor in her hand as she raised her own glass. When dinner finally ended, the guests were led to the music room for coffee and liqueurs. I took advantage of the commotion to slip away to the kitchen, where Mrs. Matilda awaited me with anxious eyes. "How was it?" she asked softly. "Did anything happen?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice to speak. How could I explain the strange dance of words and glances I had witnessed? How could I describe the feeling of being at the center of a storm that had not yet fully formed? "Go get some rest," she said, passing her wrinkled hand over my face with maternal affection. "You look exhausted. I'll send another servant to take the coffee." I thanked her with a nod and left the kitchen, but I didn't go to my small room. Instead, following an impulse I couldn't explain even to myself, I walked towards the conservatory. It was an elegant structure, all glass and wrought iron, built at the back of the house. During the day, sunlight streamed through the glass panels, warming the space where exotic plants grew in profusion. At night, like now, the place had a magical and slightly mysterious air, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the transparent ceiling. The air inside the conservatory was humid and fragrant, filled with scents of flowers and damp earth. I walked among the rows of plants, my fingers lightly brushing leaves of various sizes and textures. The black servant's dress, which earlier had seemed so elegant, now seemed out of place amidst that tropical exuberance. I didn't know exactly why I had come. Alexander had said after dinner, but the guests were still in the house, probably for hours yet. He certainly couldn't leave without being noticed. Perhaps that invitation in the cellar had just been a way to unsettle me, to make me wait for something that would never happen. "You came." His voice emerged from the shadows, startling me. Alexander stood near a large fern, almost hidden by the foliage. He had taken off his formal coat and unbuttoned his waistcoat, giving him a more relaxed, less intimidating appearance. But his eyes retained that intensity that disconcerted me. "You asked me to come, sir," I replied, keeping my distance. Although we were alone in the conservatory, the voices of the guests could be heard in the distance, coming from the music room. "And you obeyed." It wasn't a question, but there was a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Interesting." He took a few steps towards me and I instinctively recoiled. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. He stopped, tilting his head slightly as if studying me. "Isn't it obvious?" "I want the same thing you do, Helen. The truth." "I don't know what you're talking about." I tried once more without much conviction. He sighed, running his fingers through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. "Shall we stop this game? We both know what you heard behind the door last night. We both know what it means." The air seemed too thick to breathe. He was close, too close, his scent of sandalwood and something wilder invading my senses. "So it's true?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I am daughter of the late master of this house?" "Yes." His grey eyes didn't leave mine for an instant. "Half-sister to Theodore. Legitimate heir to part of these lands, this fortune. A threat to everything Mrs. Clara built after her husband's death." The words hit me like physical blows, each one confirming what my heart already knew, but my mind still refused to accept. How do you know this?" I managed to ask, feeling my legs giving way. I leaned on a nearby table between two vases of exotic orchids. "Because it's why I'm here," he replied, moving closer. This time I didn't recoil. "It's the reason I bought Blackwood Estate. It's the answer to the question you haven't asked yet. What I want from you." My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. "And what do you want from me?" "Justice." The word came out as both a promise and a threat. "Redemption. Vengeance, if you prefer to call it that." "Vengeance against whom?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Against the family that destroyed mine." His eyes gleamed with an intense emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Anger, pain, something more? My father was your father's cousin, did you know that? They grew up together, they were like brothers. Until your uncle, Augustus, forged documents, bribed judges, and manipulated evidence to strip my father of his share of the family inheritance. The same fortune that now supports this house, these halls, these dinners." The story unraveled like a ball of yarn, revealing connections I had never imagined. "And what is my role in all this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, and there was something almost tender in that smile, completely different from the predatory expression he had displayed during dinner. You, Helen of the green eyes, are the living proof of this family's hypocrisy. The illegitimate daughter who should have been drowned at birth, like an unwanted kitten but who was kept as a servant. Always in plain sight, always under control. He touched my face, his fingers lightly tracing the line of my jaw. You are my weapon and my shield. With you by my side, I can not only reclaim what was stolen from my family, but completely destroy everything they've built. A cold sensation ran down my spine. Destroy? I repeated, my voice almost inaudible. Think of the scandal, Helen. His eyes now gleamed with contained excitement. The bastard daughter, hidden in plain sight for 19 years, finally revealed. The will contested. The legitimacy of Theodore as sole heir questioned. The impeccable reputation of Mrs. Clara shattered. His hand slid from my face to my shoulder and then to my arm, sending shivers wherever it touched. And you, finally receiving what is rightfully yours. Position, respect, your share of the family fortune. It was a tempting vision, I must admit. After years living in the shadows, being treated as less than human by people who, I now knew, were my own blood, the idea of justice, of recognition, was almost intoxicating. But there was something in the way he spoke, in the almost feverish gleam in his eyes, that unsettled me. And then? I asked. After all this happens, what will become of me? Pos. His hand slid from my face to my shoulder and then to my arm, causing goosebumps wherever it passed. We will be united by a common purpose, you and I, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Two orphans seeking justice against those who stole our birthright. Don't you find that poetic? There was something hypnotic in his voice, in his gaze, in the warmth of his close presence. For a moment, I felt inclined to simply say yes, to surrender to this promise of vengeance and redemption he offered. But then I remembered Mrs. Matilda, with her kind hands and silent affection. I remembered the other servants, who had nothing to do with the power games of the great families. I even remembered Mrs. Clara, whose coldness I now understood better. It wasn't just disdain for a servant, but a constant fear that the truth about me would come to light. I need to think, I finally said, taking a step back. This is too much to absorb at once. Alexander studied me for a moment, and then nodded slowly. I understand. It's not a decision to be made in haste. He also stepped back, returning my personal space. But don't take too long, Helen. Your brother is already considering getting rid of you, remember? When he finds out I know the truth, he'll act quickly. Fear tightened my chest again. What should I do now? Nothing. Continue as if nothing has changed, as if we never spoke. He looked towards the conservatory door, as if checking if we were still alone. In 3 days, meet me at the border between the estates. There's a small abandoned chapel near the creek. Do you know the place? I nodded. I had passed by there many times when gathering herbs for the kitchen. Meet me there at dawn. Bring only what you can carry without raising suspicions. And Helen? His hand briefly touched mine, a light touch like butterfly wings. Don't trust anyone in this house. No one. With those words, he moved away, disappearing among the exotic plants as silently as he had appeared. I stood there in the middle of the conservatory, feeling as if the entire world had shifted on its axis in just a few hours. 3 days. 3 days to decide if I trusted this enigmatic man who promised justice but exuded danger. 3 days to choose between the life I knew, however limited it might be, and a leap into the unknown. 3 days to say goodbye to everything and everyone I knew. Or to discover a completely different way to face this truth I could no longer ignore. The days that followed were a strange exercise in forced normalcy. I woke with the first ray of sun, as always. I helped in the kitchen, tended the garden, obeyed Mrs. Clara's orders, and Mrs. Matilda's instructions. But inside it was as if every fibre of my being vibrated with a new, unsettling energy. I was the master's daughter. Not a servant, but a legitimate heir. Every room I cleaned, every dish I washed, every order I obeyed, everything took on a new meaning. A bitter irony that sometimes made me want to laugh hysterically. Other times filled me with such intense rage that I had to hide in the orchard so no one would see the tears streaming down my face. I observed Mrs. Clara with new eyes, searching in her gestures, in her posture, for some sign of guilt or regret, but she remained as she had always been, distant, cold, perfectly composed. Was it possible that she felt nothing upon seeing her husband's daughter living as a servant in her own home? Or had she convinced herself over the years that I truly was nothing more than the daughter of a servant who had died of fever? Theodore was harder to observe without my feelings showing. His arrogant manners, his casual disdain for all he considered inferior, characteristics I had once attributed simply to his privileged position, now seemed even more despicable. This was my half-brother, my blood, and he had considered getting rid of me as one disposes of an unwanted animal. Only with Mrs. Matilda did my feelings remain unchanged. Her gruff kindness, her sense of justice, her dedication to a job well done, all of this I still admired and respected. Many times in the past 2 days I had wondered if she knew the truth, if she had been involved in the conspiracy to keep me ignorant of my origins, but something in my heart refused to believe it. On the afternoon of the second day, I was in the orchard again, picking apples as I had done when I first met Alexander. The sky was cloudy, foreshadowing rain, and the air had that electrical quality that precedes storms. "You look worried, girl." I turned to find Mrs. Matilda observing me from the base of the ladder. Her eyes, framed by deep wrinkles, had that insight that always made me feel as if she could read my thoughts. "It's nothing, Mrs. Matilda," I replied, descending the ladder with my full basket. I didn't sleep well." She studied me for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Come with me," she said, turning towards the house. "I need your help with something." I followed her in silence, imagining what task she would have for me. To my surprise, she didn't go to the kitchen or any other part of the house where we normally worked, but rather to her own room, a small room on the ground floor, near the pantry. It was a simple but cozy room, with a narrow bed covered by a patchwork quilt, an antique dark wood dresser, and a small trunk at the foot of the bed. On the walls there were some framed engravings, mostly landscapes, and a carved wooden crucifix. Mrs. Matilda closed the door behind us and walked to the dresser. She opened the top drawer and took out something wrapped in a piece of faded velvet. "Sit down." "Helen," she said, indicating the only chair in the room, positioned near the small window that overlooked the garden. I obeyed, my curiosity growing with each moment. What could be so important or secret that we needed to be alone in her room? Mrs. Matilda sat on the edge of the bed facing me, the mysterious object in her lap. For a long moment she simply studied me in silence, as if making a difficult decision. "I always knew this day would come," she finally said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "I always knew that eventually the truth would find its way to you. I just didn't expect it to be through him." I felt my heart race. So she knew. She had always known. "What are you talking about, Mrs. Matilda?" I asked, still trying to maintain the appearance of ignorance. She smiled, a sad smile full of knowledge. "Of Mr. Daniels, of course, and of what he came here to do, and of what he told you about who you really are." The last pretense of normalcy crumbled between us. I felt hot tears begin to stream down my face, tears I hadn't even known I was holding back. "You knew?" It wasn't a question. "All this time, you knew?" She nodded, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was with your mother in childbirth. Helen, I was the one who helped her give birth, who heard your first cry, who placed you in her arms." Her voice faltered for a moment, "and I was the one who closed her eyes when she left this world, with you still on her chest." Tears now ran freely down my face. It was strange. I had imagined this moment many times in the past few days, the moment when I would confront someone with the truth. And I had always thought I'd be furious. But what I felt now wasn't anger, but a profound sadness and a relief at finally being able to speak openly. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked, my voice choked. "Why did you let me believe I was just a servant?" Mrs. Matilda completed when I couldn't finish. Because it was the only way to keep you alive, my dear. The only way to keep you safe. I wiped the tears with the back of my hands, trying to understand. Safe from what? From whom? From Augustus, she replied, and there was a tremor of anger in her normally controlled voice. He wanted you to disappear. An accident, a sudden illness, anything that would eliminate the problem you represented. A shiver ran down my spine. Did Mrs. Clara agree to that? No, Mrs. Matilda shook her head firmly. She's no saint, far from it, but she's no killer. Especially of an innocent child. It was she who suggested the solution. You would be raised as the daughter of the servant who actually died in childbirth. No one but us would know the truth. You would grow up in the house under our eyes, but without knowledge of your true identity. The revelation fell upon me like cold water. Mrs. Clara, the woman who had always treated me with distant coldness, had protected me in her own way. But why? I insisted. Why keep me close, where everyone could see the resemblance, where the secret could be discovered at any moment? Mrs. Matilda averted her gaze for an instant, as if considering how much to reveal. In the beginning, I think it was to appease her own conscience. Later, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Later, I think it became a reminder, a constant reminder of the price of her own secrets. This cryptic explanation only increased my confusion and my curiosity. What secrets? Mrs. Matilda sighed deeply. It's not my place to reveal that, Helen. Some secrets are not mine to tell. She looked at the package in her lap, then turned back to me. What I can tell you is that you are not the only one living a life built on lies in this house. With slightly trembling hands, she began to unwrap the object covered by velvet. From within emerged a small oval gold locket attached to a thin chain. The metal was slightly oxidized by time, but still gleamed softly in the light that came through the window. This belonged to your mother, Mrs. Matilda said, extending the locket to me. She asked me to keep it for you for when the time was right. With trembling fingers, I took the jewelry. It was heavier than it looked, and I immediately felt there was something inside. When I opened it, I found a small hand-painted portrait, the face of a young woman of extraordinary beauty, with the same green eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. My mother, I whispered, touching the tiny portrait with the tip of my finger. Antonia, Mrs. Matilda confirmed, with a note of affection in her voice. She was a servant, yes, but she wasn't common. She came from a good family, educated, who fell from grace. She could read, write, speak French. Your father fell in love with her the moment he saw her. I studied the small portrait, trying to memorize every detail of that face I had never known. There was something familiar about it, not just because of the eyes we shared, but something more. She looks like, I began, then stopped, unable to believe my own conclusion. Like Mrs. Clara, Mrs. Matilda completed, nodding slowly. Yes, they were distant cousins. Another convenient detail no one mentions. The revelation left me speechless. Cousins. So I wasn't just the daughter of Mrs. Clara's husband, but also of her own relative. The web of connections and secrets seemed to stretch infinitely, each revelation leading to new questions. On the other side, Mrs. Matilda said, indicating the locket, there's something else your mother left for you. I turned the small portrait and found, on the other side of the locket, a tiny golden key, so small it almost looked like a toy. What does this open? I asked. I don't know. She never told me. She just said that when you discovered the truth, the key would show you the way forward. I closed the locket and clasped it in my hand, feeling its weight and its importance. It was the only connection I had to my mother, the only thing she had left specifically for me. What should I do now, Mrs. Matilda? I asked, my voice low but firm. Alexander wants me to run away with him. He wants to use me in some kind of revenge against the family. He says it's the only way to get justice. The old housekeeper pressed her lips into a thin line. Alexander Daniels is a dangerous man, Helen. He's driven by an ancient hatred, a thirst for revenge that dates back long before you were born. Her eyes met mine, intense and worried. He doesn't care about you, my dear. He only cares about what you represent, about the weapon you can be in his hands. Although part of me already suspected this, hearing the words spoken aloud was like receiving a physical blow. "So what should I do?" I repeated, feeling suddenly very young and lost. "Stay here? Continue pretending I don't know who I am? Until when? Until Theodore decides I'm too great a threat and decides to... I couldn't finish the sentence, fear suffocating my words. Mrs. Matilda took my hands in hers, squeezing them with surprising strength for someone her age. "You have another option, Helen, one none of them are considering." "What?" Her eyes gleamed with a fierce determination I had never seen before. "You can choose your own path. Not theirs, not Alexander's, yours." She squeezed my hands harder. "You have your father's blood, yes. But you have your mother's courage. And the key she left you is not just a piece of metal. It's a promise. A promise that there's a place for you. A place that is neither here as a servant nor by Alexander's side as his puppet." I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. But how do I find that place? How do I know which is the right path? Mrs. Matilda smiled, a smile full of secrets and wisdom. "The answer is closer than you imagine." She rose slowly, her knees creaking with the effort. "Do you remember the abandoned chapel at the border of the estates, where Alexander asked to meet you?" I nodded, surprised that she even knew that. "Go there tonight, not in the morning as he asked. Look for the stone altar. There's a small opening at the base, almost invisible on the right side. Your key will fit there." My heart raced with possibilities and questions. What will I find? What your mother left for you. What no one else knows exists. Your true inheritance, Helen. Not lands or titles, but something far more valuable. Before I could ask more questions, knocks on the door interrupted our conversation. Mrs. Matilda quickly stepped away, assuming her usual posture of a stern housekeeper. "Enter," she called, in an authoritative tone. The door opened, revealing one of the younger servants, with an anxious expression. "Pardon me, Mrs. Matilda, but the mistress is asking for Helen. She wants to see her in the library immediately." I felt the blood run cold in my veins. The library was where Mrs. Clara dealt with serious matters, where she reprimanded servants for grave failures, where she made important decisions about the house. "She's coming," Mrs. Matilda replied, dismissing the servant with a wave. When we were alone again, she turned to me, her face a mask of concern. "Be careful, Helen. Don't let on that you know anything. And remember tonight at the chapel, go alone. Don't trust anyone else." I nodded, hiding the locket in my dress pocket. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with unanswered questions, I left Mrs. Matilda's room and walked towards the library, where Mrs. Clara, the woman who had conspired to hide my true identity my entire life, awaited me. The library at the manor was one of the few rooms I truly admired. Walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, a large stone fireplace that remained lit during winter, dark leather armchairs that seemed to embrace anyone who sat in them. The aroma of old paper, leather, and polished wood created an almost sacred atmosphere. Mrs. Clara sat at her mahogany desk, writing something in a large ledger. She didn't look up when I entered, nor when I lightly knocked on the open door to announce my presence. "You sent for me, ma'am?" I asked, keeping my head bowed and my hands clasped in front of my body. The posture of respect I had learned since childhood. "Come in and close the door." "Helen," she said, without lifting her gaze from her papers. I obeyed, feeling the weight of the locket in my pocket like a palpable secret. Did she know? Had Mrs. Matilda betrayed me? Or perhaps Alexander had been discovered in his nighttime visit to the conservatory. Finally, Mrs. Clara looked up to face me. She was dressed simply by her standards, a dark blue silk dress without many embellishments, her hair pinned in a low bun. There was no visible jewellery, not even the pearl earrings she usually wore daily. She looked tired, with slight shadows under her eyes. "Sit down," she said, indicating one of the chairs in front of the desk. It was an unusual invitation. Servants were rarely asked to sit in the presence of their employers. I hesitated for a moment, then took my seat, my back straight, my knees together, my hands on my lap, exactly as I had been taught. Mrs. Clara watched me for a long moment, her eyes, so similar to mine, studying my face with unusual intensity. "How long have you worked in this house, Helen?" she finally asked. The question caught me by surprise. She knew exactly how long I had been there. All my life, Mom, I replied cautiously. I was born here. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. And during all these years, you must have heard many things. Rumors, stories, secrets shared in the kitchens and corridors. It wasn't a question, but I felt she expected an answer. Servants talk, Mom, but I try not to pay attention to gossip. A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. A diplomatic answer. She rose, walking to one of the bookshelves where her fingers lightly brushed the spines of the books. Do you know why I called you here, Helen? My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. No, Ma'am. She turned to face me again, leaning slightly on the bookshelf. I received an offer for you today. A job offer? Her tone was casual, almost disinterested. From the neighbouring property. Blackwood Estate. I felt the blood drain from my face. Alexander. He had acted without consulting me, without waiting for my answer. Why? I don't understand, Ma'am, I managed to say, my voice only slightly trembling. Why would Mr. Daniels specifically ask for me? That's an excellent question. Mrs. Clara moved away from the bookshelf and returned to the desk, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she rested her hands on the polished surface, leaning slightly towards me. Why you, Helen? Among all the servants in this house, why would he choose you? The danger of that moment was palpable. Every word I uttered, every reaction I showed, could betray me. Perhaps, I began carefully, perhaps because we met in the orchard. He saw me picking apples. Perhaps he liked my work. Perhaps, she agreed without emotion. Or perhaps there's another reason. Something he saw in you that aroused his interest. Her eyes didn't leave mine, and I felt she was looking for some sign, some revelation in my expression. I don't know what that could be. Ma'am, I replied, lowering my eyes. No? The question hung in the air between us, laden with unspoken meanings. Then suddenly her tone changed. The offer is generous. Double what you receive here. A room of your own, not a shared alcove. Head housekeeper responsibilities, not a servant's. I looked up, surprised. It was more than a simple transfer of employment. It was a significant elevation in status. That's very generous. Yes, isn't it? Mrs. Clara straightened up, crossing her arms over her chest. So generous that I wonder what the true motive behind the offer is. Our gazes met again, and for a moment, just a brief instant, I thought I saw something in her eyes, not the usual coldness, but a flash of fear, concern. Whatever it was, it disappeared as quickly as it arose. Mr. Daniels asked for an answer by tomorrow, she continued, sitting down again. He said he plans to reorganize his house and would like to have the full staff as soon as possible. Tomorrow. The same day he had asked me to meet him at the chapel. Something didn't make sense. And what will my answer be, Ma'am? I asked, daring a little more than I normally would. Mrs. Clara raised her eyebrows, surprised by my audacity. That depends on you. Helen. I don't usually prevent my servants from seeking better opportunities. Something in her tone suggested the opposite, that she absolutely didn't want me to accept, but for some reason couldn't directly prevent me. I am grateful for the home and the work I've always had here, I said, measuring each word. I'm not sure I wish to leave. An admirable sentiment. She opened a drawer and took out a small velvet pouch similar to the one that had held my mother's locket. She placed it on the desk, pushing it slightly towards me. However, it would be negligent of me not to mention that, should you decide to accept the offer, this small advance would await you. A welcome gift from your new employer, so to speak. I looked at the pouch with suspicion without touching it. May I asked, hesitantly. She made a gesture of permission with her hand. Carefully, I picked up the pouch and loosened the drawstring that closed it. Inside, I found gold coins. More money than I had ever seen at once. Certainly more than I would earn in an entire year of work at the manor. Generous, as I said, Mrs. Clara commented. Observing my reaction, I closed the pouch and placed it back on the desk. Why are you showing me this, Ma'am? I asked, unable to contain the question. She studied me for a long moment before answering. So you understand what's at stake. So you think carefully before making your decision. She leaned slightly forward. You know what they say about overly generous gifts, don't you, Helen? That they usually come with a hidden price, I replied, remembering Mrs. Matilda's words. A glint of approval came into her eyes. Exactly. And the price isn't always clear at first. She leaned back in her chair, resuming her formal posture. You have until tomorrow to decide. You may go now. I rose, made a small curtsy, and walked to the door. I was about to leave when her voice stopped me. Helen. I turned, meeting her gaze once more. Yes, ma'am? For a moment, just a brief instant, I thought she would say something different, something personal. But the moment passed, and her expression returned to its usual coldness. Don't forget to help Mrs. Matilda with the linen count this afternoon. We need to know how many need to be replaced. Yes, ma'am, I replied, leaving the library with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. In the corridor, I leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to process what had happened. Mrs. Clara knew more than she let on, I was sure of it. The job offer, the money, the veiled warning, it was all part of some game I was only beginning to understand. And in this game, I was simultaneously pawn and queen, dispensable and essential, depending on who moved the pieces. The afternoon passed in a haze of routine tasks. I counted linens, helped in the kitchen, swept the music room. My body performed the tasks out of habit, while my mind seethed with plans and possibilities. Night arrived faster than I expected. After dinner, when all the residents of the house had retired and the other servants were finishing their last chores, I put a dark cloak over my simple dress and slipped out through the back of the kitchen. The moon was almost full, lighting the path with a silvery clarity that made the shadows deeper and more mysterious. I walked quickly through the orchard, across the open field beyond it, and finally entered the small woods that marked the boundary between the estates. The abandoned chapel was a small, simple structure built of grey stone now partially covered in ivy. The roof had collapsed in one corner, allowing moonlight to stream in and illuminate the interior with a ghostly glow. I entered cautiously, my footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The place had an air of sadness and abandonment, but also of peace. Deteriorated wooden pews were still arranged in rows, facing a simple stone altar at the opposite end. I approached the altar, remembering Mrs. Matilda's instructions. There's a small opening at the base, almost invisible, on the right side. I knelt and began to examine the stone base, running my fingers over the cold surface, searching for any irregularity. After a few minutes of searching, my fingers found a small crevice, so narrow it could easily be mistaken for a natural crack in the stone. I took the locket from my pocket and opened it, taking out the tiny golden key. With trembling hands, I inserted it into the crevice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, a small section of the altar base moved, revealing a hidden compartment. With a racing heart, I reached into the dark space. My fingers found something soft, fabric perhaps, wrapped around a hard, rectangular object. I carefully pulled it out of its hiding place. It was a book, wrapped in a piece of silk that had once been green, but was now faded by time. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed at the edges. A thin ribbon marked a specific page. I opened the diary at the marked place and, by the moonlight filtering through the partially collapsed roof, began to read the words written in delicate, elegant handwriting. To my daughter, if you are reading these words, it means you have discovered the truth about your birth and found your way here. I don't know how much time has passed, weeks, months, years perhaps. But I want you to know that every day since I brought you into the world has been filled with my love for you, even if I am no longer here to show it. Your name is Helen. I chose it because it means bright light. And you were exactly that to me, the brightest light amidst the darkness that surrounded me. You are the daughter of Henry Albright, master of these lands. And yes, that makes you a legitimate heir to part of his fortune and properties. But there is something more important he left you, something no one else knows. My heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out the silence of the chapel. I continued reading, each word from my mother like a precious gift. Before he died, your father entrusted me with documents, proof that his brother, Augustus, had forged property records and diverted a significant portion of the family inheritance that should have been divided among the family's cousins, including Alexander Daniel's father. Henry discovered the fraud shortly before falling ill, but lacked the strength to confront his brother. Instead, he documented everything and left the proof with me, to protect it. Clara knows this. She knows I have these documents, but she doesn't know where I hid them. That's why she allowed you to remain in the house, not only to protect you from Augustus, but also in the hope that I had told you something before I died. The documents are hidden in the pages of this diary, folded sheets among the blank pages at the end. They prove not only Augustus's fraud, but also your birthright, Helen. With them, you can claim what is rightfully yours. But I must warn you, both Augustus and Alexander Daniels are dangerous men, each in his own way. One stole out of greed, the other seeks revenge at all costs. Neither of them truly cares about you. There is a third option, my daughter. In the city, look for Eleanor Vance. She is my cousin, the only relative I trust. Give her the documents and this diary. She will know what to do, how to protect you, and how to ensure that justice is done without you becoming a pawn in these men's games. Remember, you are more than your birth, more than your blood. You are my daughter, Helen, my bright light, and I love you more than words can express. Your mother, Antonia. Tears streamed freely down my face as I finished reading. It was as if my mother were there with me, speaking directly to my heart across time. With trembling fingers, I turned the pages of the diary to the end, where I found several folded sheets, official documents, letters, records of financial transactions, carefully hidden among the blank pages. I was so absorbed in my discovery that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell over me. What did you find there, Helen? I raised my head sharply, fear freezing my blood. Alexander Daniels stood a few feet away, his tall figure silhouetted against the chapel entrance. The moonlight illuminated one side of his face, leaving the other half hidden in shadow, like a physical representation of the duality I now knew existed within him. I quickly closed the diary, hiding it in the folds of my skirt. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. "Our meeting wasn't until tomorrow." He smiled, a smile without warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "I decided to move our plans forward, especially after making such a generous offer to your mistress." He took a few more steps closer. "I thought it prudent to ensure you didn't change your mind at the last moment." I rose slowly, trying to remain calm. "How did you know I would be here tonight?" "I have eyes in the manor, Helen. More than you imagine." He looked at my skirt, where the diary was hidden. "What are you trying to hide from me?" "Nothing important," I lied, stepping back. His grey eyes gleamed dangerously. "I know a lie when I hear one, Helen of the green eyes." He took another step forward. "And I know that whatever you found in that altar is exactly what I've been looking for years." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The documents. Helen," his voice was low, almost a whisper. "The documents that prove Augustus's fraud. The documents that will allow me to reclaim what was stolen from my family. The documents that I imagine your mother hid here." So he knew. He had always known. "My mother?" I asked, feigning confusion. "The servant who died in childbirth?" An expression of irritation crossed his face. "Stop playing games, Helen. We both know who you are. We both know what's at stake." He extended his hand. "Give me the diary and the documents, and I promise I'll share the benefits with you. You'll reclaim what's rightfully yours. You'll have your revenge against those who kept you in ignorance your entire life." For a moment I considered his offer. It was tempting. Justice, recognition, revenge. Everything a part of me desired since I had discovered the truth. But then I remembered my mother's words. "Neither of them truly cares about you." And I knew, with sudden clarity, that she was right. "No," I said, my voice firm. "These documents don't belong to you, and I won't hand them over to fuel your revenge." Alexander's expression hardened, all pretense of charm and gentleness disappearing like smoke in the wind. "You're even more foolish than I thought," he said, taking another step towards me. "Do you really think you have a choice? Do you think you can simply walk out of here with these documents and go on with your life as if nothing happened?" "I have exactly that intention," I replied, backing up until my back touched the stone wall of the chapel. There was nowhere to run. He smiled again, a cruel smile that completely transformed his face. "You know what's funny, Helen? Your half-brother Theodore suggested to his mother that she get rid of you. I, on the other hand, offered you a partnership, a chance to reclaim your rightful place. His gaze hardened. But if you don't want to be a partner, perhaps you need to be removed from the path after all. Fear squeezed my chest, but I didn't let it show on my face. Will you kill me then? Just as your father tried to kill mine when he discovered he had been robbed? Surprise crossed his face for an instant. What? It's all in the diary, Alexander. The full story, not just the piece they told you. It was a bluff, based only on suspicion, but I saw from his face that I had hit a nerve. You don't know anything, he growled, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. I know enough. I took a step forward, abandoning the safety of the wall behind me. I know this revenge isn't about justice. It's about continuing a cycle of hatred that began long before any of us were born. I know you don't care about me, only about what I can do for you. And I know above all that my mother didn't want me to follow this path. He studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truthfulness of my words in my eyes. So what do you intend to do? He finally asked. Go back to the manor? Continue living as a servant, knowing who you really are? Or perhaps you intend to confront Mrs. Clara with the documents? None of those options, I replied, feeling a strength grow within me. A certainty that there was a path forward that involved neither submission nor revenge. He frowned, genuinely confused. What then? Before either of them could react, the sound of horse hooves interrupted our conversation. Alexander quickly turned to the chapel entrance, and I took advantage of the distraction to slip to the side, putting the altar between us. Alexander, a male voice called from outside. Are you in there? I recognized Theodore's voice and my heart froze. What was he doing here? Alexander hesitated, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but replied, Yes, I'm here. What do you want, Albright? Theodore entered the chapel, elegantly dressed for riding, as if he were just taking a nighttime stroll. His eyes swept the space until they landed on me, and an expression of surprise crossed his face. Helen, what are you doing here? Then, turning to Alexander, what is the meaning of this, Daniels? Alexander let out a short, humorless laugh. Why don't you ask your mother, Theodore? I'm sure she could explain very well what your favourite servant is doing here in the middle of the night. Theodore frowned, his confusion apparently genuine. What are you talking about? I realised with sudden clarity that Theodore didn't know. Mrs. Clara had never told her son that he had a half-sister, that the servant who served in his house shared his blood. Nothing that concerns you. Albright, Alexander replied, impatient. Now, if you'll excuse us, Helen and I were in the middle of an important conversation. Theodore took a step forward, his posture subtly shifting to something more menacing. An important conversation? With a servant? In the middle of the night? In an abandoned chapel? His gaze turned to me harder now. What's going on here, Helen? Does my mother know you left the house? Before I could answer, Alexander intervened. Your mother knows a lot more than you imagine, young Albright. Things that I'm sure she'd prefer you never discovered. The tension in the air was palpable. The two men stared at each other like predators ready to strike, and I was caught between them, holding a secret that could destroy both. Enough, I exclaimed, my voice echoing off the stone walls of the chapel. This ends now. Both looked at me, surprised by the authoritative tone they had never heard from me before. Helen, Alexander began, taking a step towards me. No, I interrupted, raising a hand. Don't take another step. Neither of you, Theodore. I turned to my half-brother, who seemed increasingly confused. There are things you don't know about your family, about your mother, about your uncle. Things that would change everything you think about them. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice betraying a note of uncertainty. I took the diary from my skirt and held it out where both could see it. I have the truth here. All of it, about fraud, theft, lies, and about me. I looked directly at Theodore. About who I really am. I saw understanding begin to dawn in his eyes, a suspicion he immediately tried to push away. You're a servant. The daughter of a servant who died in childbirth, he said, but his voice faltered. No, I am your father's daughter, Theodore, and my mother, Antonia, who was not just a servant, but your mother's cousin. The words came out with a force that surprised me. We are siblings. At least by our father's side. The shock on his face was almost comical. He opened and closed his mouth several times, unable to formulate a response. Alexander, on the other hand, smiled with cruel satisfaction. Look at that! The perfect heir discovers he's not so unique after all. How do you feel, Albright, knowing you've shared your home with a bastard sister all these years? Theodore turned to him, his face contorted in anger. Shut up, Daniels! This is absurd. A lie invented by you to what exactly? Alexander asked, his tone mocking. Look at her, Theodore. Look at her eyes. Same colour, same shape. The resemblance to your mother is undeniable. Ask yourself why Mrs. Clara always kept this specific servant nearby, even when she obviously bothered her. Ask yourself why she never sent her away even when you suggested it. Theodore looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and I could see the recognition in his eyes. The reluctant acceptance of the truth that was now impossible to deny. This can't be true, he said, but his voice no longer carried the same conviction. It is true, I confirmed, my voice gentler now. But that's not all. There's more, much more. About your uncle, about what he did to Alexander's family, about documents hidden for years. Documents that are rightfully mine, Alexander interrupted, taking another step towards me. Hand them over, Helen. Now. I recoiled, pressing the diary against my chest. They don't belong to you. Nor to me, nor to Theodore. They belong to justice. Alexander let out a bitter laugh. Justice? There's no such thing for people like us, Helen. There's only power. Who has it and who doesn't? He extended his hand again. With these documents, I can finally obtain the power that was stolen from my family. And you can have yours. Is that what you want? I asked, looking from Alexander to Theodore. More power? More wealth? To continue the cycle of hatred and revenge that has already destroyed so many lives? What are you talking about? Theodore asked, still stunned by the revelation. Your uncle stole from Alexander's family. Alexander's father tried to kill your father in retaliation. Your father discovered the truth before he died, but didn't have time to correct the wrong. And now here we are, the next generation, ready to continue the same macabre dance. I shook my head slowly. No, this ends here. Before either of them could react, I tore several pages from the diary. The pages I knew contained the most incriminating documents. My mother had hidden separate copies among the sheets, and now I quickly separated the ones I would take with me and the ones I would leave behind. What are you doing? Alexander shouted, lunging at me. Theodore, surprisingly, intercepted him, placing himself between us. Don't touch her, he said, his voice cold and controlled. She may be a bastard, but she's blood of my blood. And no one touches my family without my permission. The declaration surprised all of us, including Theodore himself, who seemed momentarily confused by his own words. Alexander recoiled a step. His eyes narrowed in fury. You don't understand what's at stake here, Albright. These documents can change everything. Exactly, I replied, tucking some pages into my dress and extending others to Theodore. And that's why they can't remain in the hands of just one person, especially someone driven by revenge. Theodore looked lost, staring from the pages in his hands to me as if trying to connect everything that had happened. Where are you going? He finally asked. I thought of my mother's letter, her instructions, the name she had mentioned, Eleanor Vance, the city, a new beginning, where I should have gone a long time ago, I replied. Away from here, to a place where I can start anew without the weight of these secrets and lies. Alexander took a step forward, his face a mask of determination. I won't let you go. Theodore, surprisingly, intervened again. Yes, you will. His voice had that commanding tone he had inherited from his father, one that brooked no argument. She's my sister, Daniels, and she decides her own destiny. I had never seen Theodore this way, protective, almost noble. It was as if the revelation of our kinship had awakened something in him, a sense of responsibility he hadn't shown before. Alexander looked from one to the other, clearly calculating his odds. 2 against 1, in an isolated location in the middle of the night. Even with his strength and skill, the probabilities weren't good. This isn't over, he finally said, retreating towards the entrance. I'll be back for what's rightfully mine. And when I do, I won't be so patient." With those words, he left the chapel, the sound of his footsteps briefly echoing before disappearing into the night. I was left alone with Theodore, my half-brother, the young man who had grown up under the same roof as me, but in a completely different world. "Is it really true?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Are we siblings?" I nodded slowly. "From what I've discovered, yes. Same father, different mothers." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had seen his father make many times when he was alive. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why would my mother hide something like this? To protect you, I imagine. To protect your position as sole heir. I shrugged slightly. Or perhaps out of shame, guilt. There are many possibilities. He looked at the pages in his hand. "And this? What exactly is written here?" "The truth about your uncle. About how he forged documents to steal part of the inheritance that should have been divided among other family members, including Alexander's father." I paused, considering how much to reveal. "Your father discovered it before he died, but didn't have time to correct the wrong. He entrusted the documents to my mother for safekeeping." Theodore nodded slowly, processing the information. "And what do you intend to do now?" "Are you really leaving?" "Yes," I replied, feeling a certainty grow within me. "There's nothing left for me here, Theodore. There never was, in truth. I was always an intruder, even without knowing it." "It could be different," he said, hesitantly. "Now that I know the truth, we could find a way." I smiled, touched by his clumsy offer. "It's kind of you, but we both know it wouldn't work. There's too much history, too much pain." I adjusted the cloak over my shoulders, preparing to leave. "Besides, I have a path to follow now, one my mother prepared for me." He nodded, understanding. "Do you need money? I can give you enough to start somewhere else." The offer surprised me, but I shook my head. "No, thank you. I have enough." I didn't mention the pouch of coins Mrs. Clara had shown me, which I had discreetly taken from the desk when she wasn't looking. I considered it a small part of what was owed to me, a payment for years of unrecognized service. I walked towards the chapel exit, but stopped beside him. "There's one thing you can do for me if you wish." "What?" "Take care of Mrs. Matilda. She was always good to me, the only person in that house who treated me with true affection. Promise me she'll have a peaceful old age, that she'll never lack for anything." His face softened, and for a moment I could see the boy he had been, before privilege and power had hardened him. "I promise," he said, with sincerity. I hesitated, then did something I had never done before. I extended my hand and lightly touched his face, a gesture of farewell between siblings who never had the chance to truly know each other. "Goodbye, Theodore." He held my hand for a brief moment, his eyes, so similar to mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Goodbye, Helen." And so I left the chapel and the life I had known for 19 years. The night was clear, the sky dotted with stars that seemed to show the way. I headed towards the main road where I knew the first carriage for the city would pass at dawn. On the horizon, the first signs of sunrise began to tint the sky pink and gold. A new day was dawning, and with it a new life for me, not as a servant, not as a pawn in games of revenge, but as Helen, simply Helen, following the path my mother had laid out for me so long ago. As I walked, I touched the locket in my pocket, feeling its comforting weight. Inside it, my mother's face smiled at me, and the small key, which had opened much more than a secret compartment, rested securely. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it was mine to decide. And that, I discovered, was the most valuable inheritance I could have received. Months passed since I left the manor. The city was everything I had imagined, and more. Bustling streets, people of all kinds, opportunities I never would have dreamed possible in my small village. I found Eleanor Vance exactly as my mother had indicated. An impressive middle-aged woman with the same shade of green eyes I had inherited, but with a strength and determination that spoke of a life lived on her own terms. She received me in her elegant but discreet home, listened to my story without interrupting, examined the documents I had brought with meticulous scrutiny. When I finished my account, she simply said, "Welcome to the family, Helen. Antonia would be very proud of the woman you've become." With her help, The documents were presented to the appropriate authorities. The scandal was inevitable, of course. Augustus was indicted for fraud and forgery. Part of the lands and fortune was redistributed among the legitimate heirs, including Alexander Daniels and myself. Theodore kept most of the manor and its immediate lands. I didn't want to take from him the only home he had known, just as I didn't want to return to a place filled with painful memories. Instead, I accepted financial compensation which, along with Eleanor's guidance, allowed me to establish a comfortable life in the city. As for Mrs. Clara, the public revelation of my existence and the role she had played in hiding the truth caused her ostracization from society. She retired to a smaller estate rarely seen in public. Theodore visited her regularly, from what I heard, but the relationship between them was never the same. Mrs. Matilda, true to Theodore's promise, was well cared for. She received a small house of her own on the outskirts of the main property, with a servant to help her in her declining years. I visited her once a year after my departure. Her hug was the same as ever, firm, welcoming, sincere. We cried together, we laughed together, and when I said goodbye, I felt that I had finally closed an important chapter of my life. Alexander Daniels received his share of the restitution, but the victory seemed hollow to him. Revenge is never as satisfying as we imagine, I suppose. I heard he sold Blackwood Estate and travelled abroad, seeking new beginnings in distant lands. Sometimes, when the sky is particularly grey, I remember his stormy eyes and wonder if he found the peace he so sought. As for me, I found something I never expected. A purpose. Using the knowledge I acquired alongside Mrs. Matilda about herbs, natural remedies, basic healthcare, I began to work in a small clinic that served impoverished women and their children. The work was exhausting but rewarding, and for the first time in my life, I felt that I was exactly where I should be. Eleanor became not only my mentor, but a true friend. Through her, I met people who shared my interests and values. Doctors, teachers, writers, people who judged by deeds, not by birth or social standing. On a spring evening, 2 years after my arrival in the city, Eleanor hosted a small dinner at her home. Among the guests was a young doctor, recently returned from studies in Europe, who had started working at the same clinic as I. His name was Gabriel, a quiet man, with a sharp intellect and genuine compassion. We talked about books, about medicine, about the future we envisioned for a country where access to health and education was not the privilege of a few. When the night ended, he walked me to my small house a few streets away. Under the soft light of the street lamps, he asked if he could visit me again. I agreed, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't experienced in a long time. In the months that followed, our lives intertwined in ways I never could have foreseen. Gabriel didn't care about my past, about my origins, about the scandals that had surrounded my name. He cared only about who I was in the present, my ideas, my dreams, my way of seeing the world. On an autumn afternoon, as we walked through the city park, golden leaves falling around us, he stopped suddenly and held my hands. "Helen," he said, his brown eyes serious and determined. "I am not a rich man, nor do I have titles or lands to offer. All I have is my heart, my mind, and the promise of a life dedicated to doing good. Would that be enough for you?" I felt tears in my eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so intense I could barely contain it. "More than enough," I replied, squeezing his hands. "It's all I've ever wished for." Our wedding was simple, with only a few close friends and, to my surprise, Theodore, who travelled from the province especially for the occasion. He seemed different, more mature, more grounded. He had taken over the full administration of the properties and, from what he told me, was implementing progressive changes in employee working conditions and in schools for the workers' children. "You inspired me," he said, when we had a moment alone. "You made me question everything I accepted as natural, as immutable. You made me see that it's possible to choose a different path from the one assigned to us at birth." His words touched me deeply, and I realized that somehow my story had impacted more lives than I had imagined. Now, 5 years have passed since I left the manor. Gabriel and I have a daughter, Antonia, named in honor of my mother. She has my green eyes with golden rings, but her father's gentle smile and insatiable curiosity. Together, we built a life I never would have imagined possible back when I picked apples in the orchard, dreaming of stories from distant worlds. Sometimes, when little Antonia falls asleep, I take out the old locket and open it, showing her the face of the grandmother she never knew, telling stories about a brave woman who saved important documents, who protected secrets, who loved her daughter enough to ensure her a future even knowing she wouldn't be there to see it. And I realize that, in the end, this isn't just a story about secrets, lies, and revenge. It's a story about choices, the ones we make, the ones others make for us, and how eventually we find our own voice, our own path. Today, as I write these words, the light of the setting sun streams through the window of our small study, illuminating the pages with golden hues. Gabriel is at the clinic. Antonia plays in the garden under the attentive eyes of her nanny, and I feel a peace I never thought possible. I am Helen, no longer the servant, no longer the bastard, no longer a piece in others' power games. I am simply Helen, doctor, wife, mother, mistress of my own story. And that, I discovered, is the truest form of freedom.